Hi everyone, my name is Alaina Meyer, and today I'm going to be talking to you about communication as a transaction, and then how this model can be applied to our real life situations, as well as this media that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation. So first I want to talk a little bit about this model, the transactional model. It is a modern depiction of how communication works between people, and it shows how communicators can be both senders and receivers, and how our messages are sent through channels to be decoded, and then that information is then sent back and forth between the two communicators. And then another very important factor is noise, which can be helpful or not helpful towards the communication that is going on between these communicators. And I want to use this model to look at a scene from a movie, which would be the poem scene from 10 Things I Hate About You, and how Kat uses her audiences to convey her message differently to each one, so such as the movie viewer and her classmates, and then also specifically Patrick Verona. And so if you're not familiar with this movie scene, essentially it is that Kat Stratford, she goes up to the front of her class and she begins to read her poem saying how much she hates this guy and kind of seeming like she's almost too good to be doing this presentation. And as she goes on throughout this presentation, she slowly begins to become a little more emotional as her internal feelings begin to get in the way of her communication, and her message to her classmates becomes a lot more distorted. And we realize as viewers that she is intentionally talking to Patrick. So initially, as viewers, we believe that Kat is giving her presentation just to her classmates. And as we look at this transactional model, we see that Kat is the primary sender, but we also can see that her classmates are functioning as senders as well because of their nonverbal feedback, such as body language, eye contact, and facial expressions. And that is how this transactional model is functioning through their nonverbal feedback that is being sent back to Kat. We also know that from her words that her message is that she seems to loathe Patrick, but she still finds herself being vulnerable and loving towards him. Throughout this poem, her classmates are decoding her message to create their nonverbal feedback that is absorbed by Kat, which can infect her internal noise, which will be discussed later. Now, onto Patrick and how he's interpreting this. Similarly to his classmates, Patrick begins listening to Kat as if she is just telling her whole class about her poem. And as she goes on with her poem, he begins to realize that he is her intentional audience. This is who the poem is about. He's realizing this now. And her message to Patrick is intensified by her emotions that reach out to him on a personal level. And he receives that information and communicates back by furrowing his brow and developing a concerned facial expression, which touches Kat's heart even more, which this essentially keeps the cycle going and intensifies this communication even more. Now, as we discussed earlier in the transactional model, how noise is a very important factor that goes into the transactional model. And as Kat continues her speech, her internal noise, which are her emotions, begin to get in the way of her efficiently communicating, such as her grief, confusion, heartbreak, her nerves. All of these are going into her internal noise. And as she goes on through this roller coaster of emotions, they begin to interfere with the effectiveness of her message to her classmates, while on the other hand, it intensifies her message to Patrick. So in this, we can see how noise can be both helpful to one audience, but to another audience, it can be super difficult for someone to understand what is happening, or in this situation, it is just genuinely making it more difficult for them to understand what she is saying. And then another type of noise, which is external noise, also may be affecting Kat during the time that she's presenting her poem because of a couple of classmates that make faces and snicker at her, which cause her internal noise to be heightened, like her nerves, which can intensify that internal noise that we just discussed. And a couple discussion questions that I want to pose are related to this last portion that we just talked about. One of them is, what are some positive and negative examples of noise that you've seen, and how it might be helpful to one audience but not as helpful to another audience? Are there any real life examples of that? And then are there also any similar real-life examples where this media could be used to apply our understanding of the transactional model, like where there are two audiences? Like, are there any real-life situations that this could easily be used in, and what are they? And I just want to finish this up by saying how this is such an important piece of media to look at because of how many different meanings there are. And it is super important to understand how noise is super effective or not effective in this context, and how we can apply this to our real life situations, and how it can be helpful to efficiently interpersonally communicate with others. And that is it. Thank you for watching.